Okay, update 5th of October 2021. As usual, you can send me stuff there and go to our website, catch up on YouTube. Right, so here's a graphic from Phil Jones. Lower density dispersed land uses requires more car travel and more cars, leading to lower density dispersed land uses, etc. And higher density and mixed use enables shorter and more sustainable trips and fewer cars, leading to higher density. So it's a little graphic you may want to use. Now, this is one I picked up from Giulio Maccioli, and this is lifestyle changes required to keep to below 1.5 degrees warming with, it's a bit of a complicated chart. It's to get to where we need to be by 2030, that's the black bar, and where we need to be by 2050 is emissions on the Y scale. On X, you've got a number of different countries. And let's just look at Great Britain here. And you've got, this is the measure of greenhouse gases. You've got housing here, transport here, food here, goods here, and leisure and services. Now, if we're going to get to where we need to be by 2030, which is about 2.5, something like that, we're already way above that just in the transport sector. So Giulio's saying, hey, a lot of people say, look, transport's really difficult to decarbonize. Let's talk about everything else. And he's saying, we have to decarbonize transport anyway. So that's something which is interesting for you to look at. I don't know who Hot or Cool are. That's just something I got off the Twitter. Right, there's something that Mark Strong did. Councils with higher cycling levels, and these are percentages of adults cycling once, 3 times, 5 times a week. 1 is the grey, 3 is the yellow, blue is the 5, and there's Cambridge going way up there. That's percentage, presumably. Then Oxford, then Hackney, South Cambridge, Lambeth, Wandsworth, etc.
I've got to say, Bob, Cambridge was the largest faller as well as being the highest level.
All right. And sorry, which year was this?
This is November 2019 to November 2020. It's the Active Lives survey by Sport England, but it's from the DFT's website. And right, on future iterations, I did put the link at the bottom, which was a mistake I didn't do.
Okay, do send that to me.
I'll put it on, actually, what I'll do is I'll put the link in the chat now.
I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that a council has done well in terms of what they've done in terms of sporting, walking and cycling, because Wandsworth is there, and Wandsworth, as you know, has been pretty anti-cycling, but interesting graphic. Ador is, where is that again, Mark?
That's Shoreham.
Shoreham, yeah.
That's where we've been talking about Ada, and that includes Shoreham.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. It's what's happened. It's not necessarily cause and effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, this is important. A new analysis in official statistics based on the What Kills Most report. That's shifting the emphasis round from who is killed and injured to what kind of vehicle is involved in hurting or killing other people. And that's something which the PACS report did. And as you know, I was heavily involved in that and quoted quite a lot. And that sort of thing is now coming out in the official statistics. So here you see it's showing cars as the most important, both in terms of people who are hurt or killed and others involved. Pedal cycle, you know, it's gone up in the last year because of a lot more people cycling. But pedestrians killed by bicycles is about, or in collisions with bicycles, about 3. Yeah, worth another thing I picked up, fatality rates are up 5% in 2020 for all road users, except for bicyclists. Pedal cyclist fatality rate as per mile traveled went down 3% since 2019, and general casualty rates have gone down over this last COVID year, which we've talked about a lot, and pedal cyclist casualty rates gone way down, 34%. That's worth talking about. Okay, I'm just putting this up again because it was so good. What Grant Shapps said about how we've got to not just go back to where we were before the pandemic. Wonder if anything will come out at the Tory party conference on that. And how you've got to allow time for LTNs, etc., to bed in. So, and also, police crime sentencing courts bill is still going on, and various briefing sheets are going out from the great and good here, including Road Danger Reduction Forum, and briefing the Lords about what to say with regard to road traffic offences and penalties. And if you want to know what's in the briefing sheets, do contact me. Right, reading list and consultations. I mentioned this last week. Now, this is what I just referred to, walking and cycling statistics, the impact of, sorry, it's what we had last week, the impact of coronavirus pandemic on walking and cycling. That was the one which showed a change in gender with regard to cycling, that the gap between men and women went down. This is interesting, a manifesto for decarbonising transport by Greener Transport Solutions, saying we have to reduce car usage. But despite me trying to contact them, they haven't actually sent me a copy of the actual manifesto itself. There's a list of all the organisations that have signed up supporting it, but apart from saying we need to reduce motor vehicle usage, it hasn't given anything more about specific targets or processes required. Embodied carbon and EVs I mentioned last week. Also the all-party parliamentary group on cycling and walking, their report I mentioned last week. This is a meeting on the 11th of October, electric vehicles solution or part of the problem, with various people like Carlton Reid speaking. You've probably read what I've written about electric vehicles. This is done by Extinction Roads, XR Roads Rebellion, and the Chatham House report on climate change I mentioned last week. This is a photograph taken in 1907. This is our equalities page, which I've sort of dropped off a bit. This is from Denver, Colorado in 1907. A pretty cool bunch of dudes and ladies there. Yeah, that's like people cycling in Denver, Colorado, 1907. I don't know anything about their class, where they were, what they were doing exactly, but it does show some cool people riding bikes in 1907. Okay, United Kingdom. We had quite a description about what's happening in Chorley New Road in Bolton. Here's a YouTube link for the explanation of what's been going on there and what has been going wrong. In Birmingham, yes, a big story in The Guardian. Carlton's reported on this. Birmingham to become a supersized low traffic neighborhood. Having said that, I looked at the map, and it does seem like there's only about 70,000 people involved, which is in the area, living in the area, which seems quite a small area. Carlton did say it's going to be spread out into the suburbs, but it seems to be an area about a third the size of a London borough will become an LTN. Not trying to knock it, but it may not be quite as wonderful as we think. Maybe Carlton can say something about that at the end of this presentation. In Manchester, Chris Boardman likes this cycle parking, but Mark Strong says it's style over substance. There aren't enough verticals. Mark, do you want to say something about that quickly?
Well, simply that the Bike Off project, University of the Arts London, Central St Martin's as was, did a study about 10, 11 years ago, and they looked at in incredible detail at what makes a secure rack and what makes a secure racking locking practice, and basically found that anything horizontal was more vulnerable to being broken by people with various stuff. And the more vertical, so if you remember the Camden M stand, which goes up and down and up and down, that's to increase the amount of verticalness on it. And these don't have vertical bits. So, you know, they're not.
Well, they've got near verticals.
They've got near vertical bits in certain parts, but they're lower down.
Oh.
But the other thing is they look like they're made out of really thin gauge metal, which would be easier, and there's welds in there. So, you know, it depends, as always, it depends on the oversight and all sorts of other factors as well. But I don't see anything, I don't see why people feel the need to move away from Sheffield racks. They do the business and they don't look awful.
Reinventing the wheel.
Sheffield racks don't do the business for non-standard bikes as well as
low
much.
Sheffield. You can get low Sheffield racks.
You still can't put the D-lock round the middle like you can when you've got a crossbar on the top. You then have to have even more locks for a woman's bike, and especially for a step-through bike. Sheffield stands are not great. Thank you.
No, there are low height ones which are half height. That's not. We could have a parking discussion.
Yeah.
I remember that a while ago.
Another time. Okay. I just picked up this. I'm not sure what the date is, but it's quite interesting. It's what you might call a map of high traffic neighborhoods. The sort of more red is 500 vehicles an hour on one road, and then you go down into the less red areas. So it's a high traffic neighborhood map. TfL funding for Cycle Skills 1-to-1 has been stopped, and there's reduction in funding. This is specifically for Cycle Confident, which is one of the providers. And I mentioned this last week. I've looked into it a bit, and it seems to be as part of the general cuts in funding to TfL. Ealing, I'm going to talk to Brian about how we might have a thing where we have both the campaigners and an officer from Ealing talking about what's been happening there. Hackney, I did this last week. The kind of thing you might be interested in having. This is for cycle hire bikes, whether electric or not the Santander ones, but other ones. And I think that's quite interesting, and how it could maybe be moved out a little bit further. And do note it's taking a car parking space. In Shoreditch, also in Hackney, this is an e-cargo bike hire centre. And look what happens. Someone's just decided to park in front of it and stop people from getting them out. Okay, that's this is the last time I'm going to take an extract from Paradise Street. My scanner's broken down, and anyway, we've been through quite a few of the pictures. This is a nice one from Salford in Manchester. Nice takeover of a basic street, and that's 1977, which is not that long ago. And two more slides. There's always Dave Walker, does these lovely appropriate cartoons published by Cycling UK, how we can save fuel on shorter journeys, and I'm sure you all know the answers to that, and that's very nicely presented. And finally, one of the graphics from Bike is Best. They just do really excellent graphics. So that's it for the news update today. Thank you. Any comments? Carlton, do you want to say anything about Birmingham?
Yeah, Bob, I would just say, yes, it's not the same size as London, or even a London borough, but it's symbolic. This is Brum, this is Birmingham, this is the motor city, this is Britain's Detroit, this is the most car-centric, well, there are lots of car-centric cities in the UK, of course, but with Coventry and Birmingham, they're the key cities. So if the if the officials in Birmingham are able to take out cars and have an aspiration for take out even more in the future, because this is just a start, then that's amazing.
Yeah.
And the transport plan was meant to be out. I shouldn't have, the trade secret is, I shouldn't have done the story when I did yesterday. Apparently it was today, 2 o'clock. Not yesterday at 2 o'clock when the Guardian story came out. Anyway, it still isn't up on the website, so I aren't actually able to see the official transport plan. But when you actually dig into it, I just got the text version of it without all the fancy pictures. There is so much meat in there, and I had 700 words in the Guardian, and I had to just skim the surface of all the important stuff in there. And when they're taking out major roads, quite apart from blocking the roads off around the exterior there, they're blocking a major A38 tunnel that goes, absolutely dissects the city. They're blocking that off, and they're probably gonna cap it, like all of these pictures you see of the Netherlands where they cap the canals. They're going to do that for the A38. It's the Queensberry Tunnel. There's some major stuff there. So I would say it's not just symbolic. There's some really good things in there, and there are many things in that plan that I think will amaze people. So that's why I wanted to do the story and get it in the Guardian and get it out there.
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying, if I can just make a quick comment, is it kind of reminds me about the congestion charge area. And that was, again, a sort of symbolic thing. Actually, London's congestion charge area is a very, very small part of London. And I think there was a kind of mood around 2000 when it was getting ready that, hey, everything's going to change. And it wasn't pushed through. It wasn't pushed through into smart road user charging throughout all of London. And we are talking about it now, but again, it's a question of delay. So, it's all about getting that symbolic thing to be kind of pushed through and carried on and continued. Any other comments, anybody?
Well, we've got Dave and then Mark. Dave Holiday, PC keyboard. Dave, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm coming in on the PC, on the laptop, because the keyboard's handy for typing in chat. The laptop works better for conversation. 2 points. One, Carlton commenting about Birmingham Ring Road. We actually got a petition, if anybody wants to pile in on it, reviewing repairs to the M8. And anybody who's got concrete viaducts and such like, I can send and give links to pictures. The M8 is falling apart. It's on the verge, it's on a par with Genoa with their viaduct falling down. Lumps of concrete coming off. If you look on my Flickr account, you'll see tons of pictures of bits falling off the motorway, exposed steelwork, everything falling down. And it's probably going to cost more, really, a really severe dent in the budgets. And we're saying, well, the M8 isn't needed because it's only busy when people are driving to the car parking spaces in central Glasgow. And the one thing I pick up on Carlton with Birmingham, it's not going to work unless you close some car parks, because I've been in Birmingham at 10 o'clock at night when the arenas come down and a couple of theatres have come down. And it's bedlam as a couple of 1,000 space car parks all try to get onto the A38 at one point.
Dave, they are going to be taking away a lot of parking.
Yeah,
that is one of the strategies, is to take away surface parking and to take away any new development is going to have all sorts of parking restrictions put on it. There's big chunks in there about parking reduction. So they've got that nailed down. They know what they're doing. Really
hit the journey generators too, because I'm doing something with hospitals in Scotland, which are less than 5 minutes bike ride from a station. I've been talking to Graham about Moses Gate also in Bolton, only 1.2 kilometres from the Royal Bolton, which is drowning in a sea of cars. By comparison, the hospital that's connected well with a station gets 1.8 million boardings a year. Moses Gate gets 20,000. So we could do things to the rail industry if we can get cycle connections to hospitals, build that in. The Birmingham one is a particular case in point. It's absolutely abysmal getting to the hospital from the station at university. Just to pick up on Robert's thing on cycle parking, Utrecht and Cambridge, they came to the conclusion that tulip or curve stands were the ones they liked because they supported the bike. And I've been looking at designs of stand which support the bike and allow you to lock up tricycles, tandems, backfeets on the same stand, which does work. It can happen. And the Glasgow stand, which we designed and specified in 1995, actually has that crossbar, like the London Roads Director one, which is the one with the relief that's molded on in ferrocast. So yeah, bars have been in big time on Sheffield hoops. It's a good place to hang the lock. It also stops the bike sliding down, and it's a tapping rail for blind people and stops guide dogs walking underneath, towing the owner behind them into a bike stand. That's it.
Thanks, Dave. Mark, did you want to come in?
I was just going to report on the Labour Cycles ride last week, but before you do, Dave, flyovers falling down. Liverpool were ahead of everyone on that. They've taken their 2 flyovers down in Dale Street, basically because they were built with no way of inspecting them, and it would have cost a huge amount of money to replace them. It doesn't seem to have made massive impacts. It's the big problem in Liverpool is the contractors who are doing the work to remediate. All the plans have all gone bust, so no one knows what's going to happen next. But I wanted to just report, unfortunately, we picked the absolute wettest day of all, so we had about half a dozen MPs, well, 1 MP and half a dozen councillors along last week, including the former leader of Ealing, Julian Bell, who did the whole ride in a shirt and jacket in absolute torrential rain. So complete kudos to him for not bothering with any waterproof whatsoever. He was very phlegmatic about it. I mean, some of you may know him very well, better than me, but he was very phlegmatic about his removal from office and was just waiting for his successors to have their comeuppance about Ealing. So I think he's got over the immediate pain. And various other councillors from Southwark and Croydon and all sorts of points. We didn't go to Old Shoreham Road simply because it was too far, and it was certainly too far in the weather that we had, but it was really good to actually get a view. And they're just as hacked off as what Brighton and Hove Labour Party have been doing as anyone else are. And apparently Labour Cycle Stall had really good business, as it were. Lots of people very interested in stuff that's going on. And I see that Tory Cycles had a stall at Manchester this week, and I was wondering if anyone in Manchester had popped in. Well, they probably can't pop in, it's probably inside the secure zone, but if anyone had seen them. I'll take that silence as no.
Yeah, I'm afraid I did. I walked around the secure zone, but didn't go in. I went to various things, but I do love it when they're in town, though. They all look so helplessly lost. Anybody else got anything else before we move on? I just wanted to give a plug. I'm going to pop it into the chat, but my team work with the Urban Transport Group, and we've got a lovely thing Thursday lunchtime, a webinar on play streets and children. If anybody fancies joining in, the link is in the chat, so have a look. If you can join that, that'd be great. Brilliant. Anything else, Bob, from you? Is that we're all done?
No, that's all news updates, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. So next up, we're going to go to a friend of mine, Pete Stringer from City of Trees in Manchester, because in discussing with Brian and a few others, we thought it might be interesting to look at green infrastructure alongside active travel infrastructure, and how they can perhaps work better together. So Pete, can I hand over to you to give us a quick show and tell, and then we'll have a discussion. Oh, Pete, have you frozen? Oh, there you go. Thanks, Pete.
Yeah. Right, it's been a bit slow. Okay, great stuff. Well, thanks very much for having me along. I've tried to decarbonise at the moment. As you can see, I'm wearing my coat because it's so bloody cold in my house, but I'm not going to put the central heating on. So that's my bit for carbon reduction today. So as Steve mentioned, we're from an organisation called City of Trees, and what I'm going to do is actually just go through a little bit of what our initiative is about, and also some suggestions about why trees and active travel can work side by side. So just to confirm who I am, my name's Pete Stringer, ex-town planner, not a tree person, but I've come to, I think, understand a bit more about trees in the last 20 years or so. Oh dear. Oh, there we go. Right. Okay. So as I mentioned, we're a tree initiative. We're part of a community forest network across England. We're one of 12 community forests, and we were launched in 2015, although we are basically a phoenix from the flames, or a new incumbent. We used to be Red Rose Forest, but we rebranded in 2015 so that we could work effectively across the whole of Greater Manchester, all of the 10 districts in Greater Manchester, because prior to that, we only really covered part of Greater Manchester. So we can operate a lot more strategically now. And our target really is to obviously bring more trees to Greater Manchester. And at the moment, that is set at 3 million trees over the next 5 years, which is quite an ambitious target. Not because planting trees per se is a difficult thing, but finding the places to plant them is really hard. But we're working with lots of partners to hopefully identify the places that we can do that over the next 5 years. It's not just about planting trees, it's also about managing our woodlands as well, making sure that they're fit for community use and that they continue to provide all the range of benefits, those ecosystem services, which are so important for people and climate change resilience. And of course, at the bottom there, you'll see that connecting people to trees and the woods around them is absolutely key. We shouldn't just be doing it for the sake of it. We should be doing it for communities and getting them involved in the process as well. So, as previously mentioned, we now cover the whole of Greater Manchester, all 10 districts. And the map on the right, you can see, is the community forest map for England. So we're one of 12, and we've had 2 recent additions, the North East Community Forest and also the Plymouth Community Forest right down in the bottom southwest corner. So we're growing in terms of our coverage, and hopefully there will be more community forests in the future. We're also part of another initiative called the Northern Forest. As you can see from that map, that is a large section of the M62 corridor from Liverpool in the west all the way over to Hull in the east. And that takes in 4 community forests, and we're all working collectively to try and get more trees on the ground. Our target is 50 million trees in 25 years. So again, another significant target for us to achieve, but I think we're already making good progress, and we're working with lots of landowners, and farmland is becoming increasingly more important as part of that process. So anyway, that's a little bit of a preamble about who we are and what we do. What I want to talk about now is how can trees be part of that environment that will hopefully create better places for active travel, for people, for walking and cycling. I've shamelessly stolen an extract there from the Transport for London guide. Okay, so yeah, obviously I just gave you the preamble about what we are, but I just wanted to put the case forward why trees adjacent to cycling and walking routes are hopefully a good thing and can be harmonious as well. Okay, sorry, it's been a right pain if you've been very slow. So first thing I wanted just to focus on was air quality. This is a diagram that I've managed to borrow from Professor Rob Mackenzie and Dr. James Aline. I think this is also in the Transport for London guide as well. So I think people frequently feel that trees are good at actually intercepting air quality and trapping it on their leaves or absorbing it through their stomata. But actually, where they can be really beneficial is creating uplift of polluted air. So if you look at that image where it says the vegetation barrier, if you can imagine a walker or a cyclist to the right of that vegetation barrier, what happens is that the vegetation or the tree will cause an uplift of the polluted air, and that will take it higher into the air and cause it to mix with other cleaner air, so turbulence if you like, and it will dilute the concentration of pollutants in the air. But what it will also do is, by creating that barrier and forcing polluted air upwards, it will create a cleaner pocket of air behind that vegetation barrier. So in other words, the area where your cyclist will be cycling or your walker will be walking. So I think that's probably, for me, where trees and vegetation can be more effective, by creating those pockets of clean air behind them. The other thing also I think it's worthwhile, I suppose, focusing on here is that, you know, where you have got cycle lanes that are shared with vehicles, that having well tree-lined streets can create something called like an edge effect, which is a narrowing effect and has a psychological impact on the drivers. They feel that the road is narrower, and as such, it encourages them to naturally slow down, on average around about 7 to 8 miles per hour, as you can see from that study that was undertaken in Michigan. So, you know, that I think is worthwhile, even if you can't have separate lanes between cyclists and vehicles. If you can have trees either side, it can create that narrowing effect and that natural slowing down. And the other thing I think might be worth touching on is disruption caused by climate change. If we have large rainfall incidents that cause surface water flooding, then of course that means that the roads and potentially footpaths are not usable for pedestrians and cyclists. So what we've done here in Prestwich and in Bury, and we've also done it in Salford as well, along with other colleagues in Salford, and we're now looking at this in Manchester, is creating Suds enabled tree pits. So in other words, what you're doing is proactively encouraging water, surface water, to go into where the trees are planted. That can be either through permeable surface material or directly through the storm grids and turning around the gully pots to take water into where the trees are planted. This has the added advantage of creating better environments for planting trees in, but of course, as I say, it will help to reduce that surface water flooding and disruption to cyclists and walkers. In addition to the surface water flooding, which obviously is a manifestation of more extreme weather events, I think it's also worth saying that the trees can provide, you know, shelter to pedestrians and cyclists from wind and from rain. But also they're really good at screening the source of noise pollution. Now, whilst trees themselves might not be enough to actually intercept and absorb noise, they can actually mask the source of noise, and that's been well proven to have a calming influence on people. So I think that's worthwhile thinking about, creating a separate barrier between the vehicles and the source of the noise and pedestrians and cyclists. And of course, obviously, trees are good at moderating temperature as well, helping to provide shade and evaporative cooling from transpiration. So a much better environment for walking and cycling in on very, very hot days in those extreme periods of heat which we are now experiencing more and more of. I can't just talk about trees and say that they're brilliant. Well, I think they are brilliant, but obviously they do create issues in terms of things like leaf litter. And so we need to think about what are the design solutions for that, because we can't always expect every single leaf to be picked up straight away by the local authority. So I think it's probably important that where we're thinking about siting trees adjacent to cycling and walking areas, that perhaps it's trees that have smaller leaves, so they are less likely to create a slip hazard, because those bigger leaves can, you know, obviously form, if you like, the footprint of a foot and also as well of a bicycle wheel. So I think that's important, thinking about the tree species from a leaf perspective, but also thinking about the form, the shape of the trees and how high they are pruned up. So you can see on the left image there, we've got a very fastigiate tree in Manchester city centre. That's a Carpinus Betulus fastigiata Franz Fontaine. That keeps its shape really, really well. You don't have to do a lot of pruning, so it's quite high up, and so it leaves plenty of space between the base of the canopy and the pavement, so as not to interfere with walkers and cyclists coming past. Obviously, the example on the right just shows, you know, where you've got lower branches, which could potentially be an obstruction or even potentially a source of harm. So I think finally, just the final image really of you know, the difference that a street tree planting scheme can make to a walking and cycling environment. This is a scheme that we delivered a few years back. It's not quite yet reached its fruition. Some of those people on the call today will know this street in Greater Manchester, in fact, Manchester city centre. The building on the left-hand side used to be where the hacienda was. For those of us that used to do our clubbing there, I don't know if anyone is on that call. Steve, did you used to go there? And Brian did, yes, good. So that was knocked down. You got an apartment block there, but as you can see, a really, really soulless street, not one that particularly invites somebody to walk or cycle down it. And then we planted it up a few years ago. Obviously, the trees haven't reached their full growth potential, but I think straight away, it does create a more attractive place for people to walk and cycle in. And you can see there is a cycle lane down there. Hopefully, as those trees will start to increase in size, they'll create that edge effect, that narrowing effect, which I hope will make cars go, or the drivers of the cars drive at a much more reduced rate and create a safer and more pleasant environment for those people that are cycling or walking along there. So that was really all I wanted to show, and do apologise for the breakdown of my presentation earlier on. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. That was great. We all love trees, and yeah, I remember I was working when my company was doing the Value in Urban Realm toolkit, and we were coming up with prices in the millions for the real value that trees had. And not that I should always take everything to money, but I do naturally in my brain. But has anybody got any questions for our tree specialists? And you'd think in Manchester, you'd think Suds would be everywhere. It's always from this with city trees, where it's just like, damn, it drizzles every day, and yet there's pools of water and the drainage is terrible, and it always like if not there, where. Okay, I'll Graham, have you got your hand up for this?
Sorry, that's an old one.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got a new hand from Mark then. Mark, come on in.
2 words, root damage, or how do you stop it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. I think there's 2 ways of answering that. Firstly, it needs to be the right type of tree to avoid aggressive root systems. Certain trees have much more shallow roots than others. So, you know, try to avoid those. The second thing as well is creating a big enough environment for the tree roots to grow into and to try and contain them. So having a large tree pit, and we use modular structures, which means you can get an uncompacted soil, so that gives plenty of space for the roots to grow in unhindered. So it's really about species selection and tree pit design, Mark.
Yep. Any other questions for Pete? Getting near the end anyway. All good, Pete. Well, look, thanks for sharing. It's always good to get on the trees. Have you been involved in any of this stuff? Because I was really interested in your air quality bit, and there's lots of like data around different plants and arrangements of what would clear out, and it's a big one. And certainly in Greater Manchester, we've been trying to like get people to not just concrete everything. Can we do a kind of hedgerow as separation, and can that fulfill a kind of air filtration kind of a approach? I wonder if you had any ideas or thoughts in that area.
I think the key thing there, Brian, is that I referenced a diagram that being produced by Dr. James Levine and Professor Rob McKenzie. It's making sure you get the trees in the right place. Now, they've got a piece of software called Green Infrastructure for Road Air Quality. And there's always the danger if you put the trees in the wrong place, they can actually trap polluted air and make the actual street environment worse. So it's really getting an understanding of the variables, and that might mean things like road width, traffic levels, aspect, building height, etc., etc. So that piece of software that, say, Dr. James Levine and colleagues have produced is really good, because you can feed those variables into the software and understand where it's best to place your trees that will create benefit rather than creating disharm or actually trapping in that air pollution.
Yeah, it's really good. I've seen the City of London, and they've got a really amazing 3D model for the new buildings that go up. Yes, it's a tricky one to get your head in. When it comes to drainage, you go, well, high, low, you're all sorted. When it's come with air, oh, where's it coming in? Oh, there's a nearby river. It's a tricky one. I'll bring in Rupert.
Hi there. Just a query, Pete, you mentioned briefly that you very often see information relating to trees regards to trapping particulates. I've read a few papers and searched for information on this in the past, and yes, there's there are studies that have tried to estimate the quantity of particulates that are trapped, but I've never seen anything that suggests what happens to those particulates. I mean, I assume they're not literally subsumed into the leaves. So what then happens when the wind blows or it rains? Do they not simply end up back on the ground again? Yeah,
I mean, there's noxious gases that will be absorbed into the stomata, and then there's the particulate matter, so those hydrocarbons. They will be on the surface of the leaf, and usually the local authorities will sweep them up and take them away. It's one of the reasons why they can't usually compost them, because they have got contaminants on them, but the surface of the leaf is very good at holding on to it. So it's a case of picking them up and taking them away, I'm afraid. But that's standard for street cleansing anyway.
So you're confident that the particulates stay on the leaf until the leaf falls?
Well, I wouldn't guarantee that.
The weathering would wash it off.
No, I wouldn't guarantee. There will be an element of the water, the rainwater washing them off. But I think there's two ways of answering that. Obviously, some of that will go into the sewer system, and it will be treated further down the line. Second point is, if we've got a Suds street tree system where the water can go into the tree pit, then it will be treated by the bacteria within the soil structure to turn it into an inert compound. So, but at the end of the day, I think there's always going to be a downside to everything. It's whether the positives exceed the downsides. So I think you're right.
I've just never heard anybody make the point. There's always confidence talk about trapping, and I just that bit has always been missing in what I've read. So I just wanted to ask someone who could answer it.
I think logic would prevail that if there's material on the surface and you get heavy rainfall, it's going to wash it off.
That was my
assumption. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Pete.
Right. Can you see that, everybody? Can you see that?
Yeah, that's good, Bob. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So, people, this is something that really follows on from the kind of stuff that Peter Cox was talking about last week. And what it's about is something that I've been going on about for literally decades. And I'm now doing a piece of work with Ian Walker, who you know, who's professor at Surrey University, and Tim Gamble at Bournemouth University. It's work in progress. We don't necessarily all agree on everything. Those two are basically psychologists. My background's sociology. And what we're trying to do is talk about the kind of reactions that people have against low traffic neighborhoods, cycle lanes, reallocation of road space, and the kind of what they come up with and how to deal with it and whether we should be dealing with it. And it's called Discourses of Delay Against Active Travel Measures. It's also based roughly on something that Giulio Mattioli's been doing on discourses of delay against doing actions against climate change, global heating. So that's the kind of background. Let me go into it as follows. This is something that Andrew Gilligan said way back in 2017. This is from the GLA Transport Committee, and he said, my view is that a backlash is inevitable whenever a meaningful scheme is proposed. Cycling schemes nearly always have substantial majority support. It is a sign that it's a good scheme because it does make a change to the status quo if there's a backlash. And he says, you have to consult, build up consensus, but you need to recognize that for some people, for some opponents, you're never going to be able to persuade them. And he talks about filibustering and the kind of opposition they get. So we talked about that a bit last week. I want to go into it in a bit more detail as follows. So I'm agreeing with Gilligan that we should consult people. We need to provide evidence about whether there's been traffic displacement, increases in noxious emissions or whatever. Look at the monitoring from councils like Lambeth and Islington, the work by the Active Travel Academy, also the official DFT research, which has come out in the 1 year after gear change and other publications. And there are genuine concerns. So if people are saying in good faith they have certain concerns, you have to try and discuss those issues with them in a nice, rational, polite manner. You also have to move into the area of demythologizing the kind of things we always come up against, that motorists have a special right to be out there because of a so-called road tax, and they've taken a driving test, therefore they're special and more important than bicyclists, and they've paid for the road and so on. So you actually have to take apart to deconstruct those myths, and again, do so politely and rationally and sensibly. But, and here's the but, and it refers to things that, for example, Simon Monk's been saying here, that after a while, you can't actually engage in rational discussion with a lot of the antis, and you have to be aware of that. So Ian Walker has said that there's a body of research on misinformation showing that correcting misinformation can be problematic, as it often just reinforces the misinformation in people's minds rather than correct it. Okay, so you've got the people who are coming up with all this, I would say, bigotry against cycle lanes, against low traffic neighborhoods, against reductions in motor vehicle traffic. And at some stage, your corrections of this are going to be counterproductive. And Ian goes on to say quite clearly, a lot of the arguments put forward, whether on traffic or vaccines or whatever, aren't in any way rational or researched. He suspects that the emotion comes first, discomfort at having one's behaviors questioned. And then the arguments are thrown in as a way of trying to make the whole issue go away, much as in the cognitive dissonance process. So Ian and Tim are looking at those kind of psychological mechanisms that are going on in the minds of the antis, who we will all come up against. So my summary is that do not expect being rational and logical to work, okay? You have to be rational and logical to start off with, but don't expect it to work in convincing people. And continuing an attempt at discussion after explaining basic facts can often make things worse. There's always a vociferous group against you, have cognitive biases, and background, ideology, and belief systems. This is what I, with a background in sociology, anthropology, want to kind of focus on. So what my point is that we need to develop concepts to refer to the refusal to accept questioning of the car-dominated status quo. So I'm saying we've got this status quo and people are refusing to not only budge, but to actually even regard any part of it as problematic. And I'm saying we need to have a language amongst ourselves to actually be able to describe this. And I'm looking at the more society-wide issues, the issues about belief systems, about ideology that people adhere to. And those belief systems are backed up by the motoring industry, the road safety industry, and others, most obviously Daily Mail, whatever. They will back up these myths, and those myths in turn bolster up the status quo with more road building, etc. So what kind of concepts am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that we have a sort of belief system, which I put in inverted commas in that quote, the right to drive where, when, why, and how the driver wants. And this refers to one of the transport ministers under Margaret Thatcher, Nicholas Ridley, who says motorists want to drive where they want. And he didn't quite put it like that, but he said that's what motorists want. And that is the sort of quote that describes the sort of system of beliefs that we're up against. And I referred, here are some suggestions. One is what I call driver arrogance. And I was thinking about that because of the appalling Janet Street Porter saying that cyclists are arrogant, presumably all of us. There is a kind of assumption of rights which they don't have. So driver arrogance is one phrase that comes to mind, or driver over entitlement, unjustified entitlement. And we need to put that also in the context, not just of opposition to low traffic neighborhoods, road space reallocation, need to reduce motor vehicle mileage, but what's happening throughout the implementation of transport policies. And John Adams has used the phrase hypermobility. It's slightly suspect because there's a medical condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is also referred to as hypermobility, and there's a bit of an issue about that. My ex has hypermobility, so it's a bit of a thing for me. John Whitelegs talked about mobility. Do read his book, Mobility. It's a very short book and it's splendid. Talking about the kind of problems that we're up against. And I've referred to it as car supremacism. And a lot of people, particularly on the left, get very upset about me using the word car supremacism. You're not allowed to do that. You should only do that with racism or something properly important. This isn't important. I think it is important, and I think you should too as well. So we're talking about this kind of bundle of destructive beliefs. And in my presentation, I just end up with this thing here from our Prime Minister. And this is in his introduction to the 1 year on from gear change. And it's a tremendously important paragraph, which I think you all need to keep in front of you. And he's talking about the road space reallocation. He says, if you're going to oppose these schemes, you must tell us what your alternative is. Because trying to squeeze more cars and delivery vans on the same roads and hoping for the best is not going to work. And he then sort of talks about as when things bed in, people support them. But I want to refer to that. Here's a nice little bit of positive stuff at the end of the presentation. I want to talk about that process of saying to people, okay, you may not like a particular issue and a particular position, but what is your alternative? And what's going on there is that we move from saying, hey, how about these solutions? Aren't they nice? Wouldn't you like kids playing in the street? To saying, look, we have to do something. It's no longer about the public health advantages to people who cycle and walk instead of driving. It's no longer about reducing noxious emissions. It's no longer about recreating local community. It's no longer about addressing transport poverty. It's no longer about that. It's about saying, we've got a climate emergency. We have to do this. Even with EVs, we have to reduce car usage. And it's saying to the opponents, we're not here to market something towards you, and if you like it, that's cool. We have to say something has to happen, and if you can't support what we're putting forward here, you have to do something which is going to be a real alternative. So what I try and do here is that I'm in a way kind of what you might rather pompously call waging ideological struggle. It's saying, right, we are now in a position where we have built-in problems associated with mass car use that have never really been fully addressed. And what we have to do is do in some ways, and you might find this rather extreme, do feel free to say this, we have to do more or less what the second wave of feminists did in the 70s, what anti-racists have done, and to say, look, we are not accepting this anymore. The cyclists and walkers have always been out there. There are problems with a range of negative effects from motorization, which you've never really fully addressed. We are saying we're not having it anymore, and you have to come up with any alternatives if you don't like what we're suggesting. So, of course, it doesn't mean that you don't have any cars around. It doesn't mean that it's the end of people driving around at all anywhere. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, people who say this are manifesting their panic and their inability to engage in rational discourse. But we have to talk about this as being a set of mystifying, negative, socially unacceptable things, which we're not going to put up with. Motoring is too important to be left to motorists, and we are challenging that status quo. And I think we've never really been able to say that in a kind of forceful, definite, I mean, still polite and courteous and so on way. So that's what I'm trying to work my way towards. And can I just finish off with saying, Simon, Simon will come in on this, but what I'm trying to say here is that there's a kind of shift from it's actually trying to engage directly with motorists and saying, this is something which we have to do. Sorry, I just remembered what I just forgot something. Paul Gannon was saying to me on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, no, this is wrong. You're going to stigmatize motorists. You're going to make them upset. You're going to alienate them and so on. And he said the best thing to do is just try and get the infrastructure in, try and get more people cycling and so on and so on. And that's true, but there is a problem, as we've seen with Kensington, Chelsea, Shoreham, and various other cycle lanes, and quite minimal changes whereby even these quite small positive measures don't get through while you're not challenging that basic sort of great big mound of prejudice and ideology. So I think we do actually have to say to motorists, okay, this will inconvenience some people in some ways. This will be bad for some people, but we have to have it. And you have to come up with an alternative if you don't like it, because this has to change. And it does involve being in some ways quite respectful towards motorists and saying, look, we're going to treat you like adults. We're going to say stuff has to change. If you don't like what's going on in here, you have to come up with that alternative. And that means that we, at least amongst ourselves, have to have some kind of language about how there has been this codependence and how we will have to deal with it in certain ways. I welcome your comments.
All right, Bob, I think there's probably going to be a fair few that was you're out there then. You got a little bit us and themy for me, but I'm going to come back at the end and let other people come in, because certainly have a different take on that. Steve, come on in.
I totally thought you were going to bring Simon in first, because he's been typing in capitals and everything. Desperate.
I'm going for the hand order.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel really torn on this one. I really do. Because Bob, I've given a number of presentations about the sort of the predominance of car culture politically, and I felt it really strongly campaigning for a congestion charge in Greater Manchester a few years ago, where we came islands from drivers, you know. So I had a bottle thrown at me from a car, and it was, you know, it felt really, really genuine, and you could feel that culture. And I think, so for me, I'm really interested in that. But at the same time, I know from my everyday practice in terms of campaigning, trying to convince people to.
Steve, you keep on freezing, Steve.
How about conversation?
Yeah, he's cutting out a bit, isn't he?
You're cutting out a lot, Steve. Maybe take the video off.
Well, all the eloquent bits are missed. Yeah, can you hear me now, Bob?
Yeah, that's better.
That's Steve. Steve, we might give your connection like a minute or two to re-establish itself. Because you've definitely got, you might want to make me co-chair in case you totally kick off. I'll jump over to Simon, because I know he's raring to go. And I'm raring to go as well, but I'm just trying to be gracious, because I was like, go on, Simon, come on in.
I'm just going to say, please, no, please don't do that as campaigners, folks. You know, the people who are opposing the schemes and the progression that we want are people struggling with change. You push them around, you label them negatively, and all they do is double down on that stuff. They just dig themselves in. You ask them for alternatives and they give you none, but it doesn't dismantle their opposition. It just makes them angry. Yeah, these are folks generally who we want to leave alone, to be brutally honest. And I'm as guilty, you know, I have come from years of being angry on social media with people, and I'm trying really, really hard to fix my bad habits. So please learn from my experience, other people's experience. The way that we win here, the way that we do better, is by articulating a positive vision of the future that people can understand and see and believe. And bringing the unengaged middle. You know, that's the simple answer, is that whenever I've seen door-to-door work, whenever I've seen stuff, and you go out to people on big schemes, massive schemes, controversial schemes, there's huge numbers of people who are like, oh, I think I saw a leaflet on that. It's probably in the recycling bin. So the simple truth is that we are the very, very passionate, positive, progressive people. We're on the side of the angels, I believe, etc. The folks who are opposed to these schemes, they're as small a tiny vocal minority as we are. We don't win by making it us against them, because then it's 1% of the population against another 1% of the population. The way we win is by articulating a vision to the people who aren't really engaged. That vision doesn't generally include shouting at other people on social media or being oppositional or whatever. It's, here's a nice thing, we can have more nice things, these things broadly work, here's how they work elsewhere, here's how they could work in your area, etc. And if we start doing other stuff, we're idiots. And I'm really sorry to say that. the same is true with councillors. I've just come off a series of calls where over and over again campaigning groups both inside London and outside London say to me, how do we depose a councillor? How do we attack them? We're all nice middle class people generally around here. There are dark arts to campaigning, and there are ways of making people hurt, but it isn't really something I generally recommend, because most folks on this call, most folks happily on our side of the equation, don't have the stomach for it. So if you're not going to go all out and go really nasty, don't kind of faff around and be a bit moany to councillors. It doesn't work. It just annoys them. Yeah. Try and find a way to win them over, because that works.
Can I?
Yeah, go on, Bob.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding here, because I'm actually saying a lot of that myself. Sorry if I didn't get it across properly. What I said, if you look at the slides, was that being rational with a proportion of the people you're talking to isn't going to work. So then actually what you do is you just back off. You don't engage, because they're not going to engage with you, and that's it. So what I'm doing is not about wading in and going to hard-pressed councillors and so on. I'm completely agree. You show the positive examples, you show you can win. And you don't go in saying you're a caste supremacist, therefore you're an arsehole, and that's wrong. What you do is you have to have that understanding of background ideas and beliefs to understand what you're up against. So I'm not actually disagreeing with you on the sort of tactical thing. I'm talking about how when you've made a rational argument and it's not getting through, you've got to understand why that rational argument is not getting through. Very often people just don't want to hear it. I mean, the kind of Clarkson ideology is, this is my freedom. I don't want to be told what to do by anybody, and it's important for me. And we have to understand that that's what it is for actually more than 1%, and that we're not going to be able to have rational argument, and we're not going to be able to force them in a confrontation either. I'm just trying to get some kind of explanation of background beliefs. Now, having said all that, I think there is a sense in which we need to attempt to change those background beliefs. Plus, I also think that, as individuals, if we're getting in the mainstream media a lot of bigotry, and I think it's dangerous bigotry thrown at us, we have to say, sorry, that's not acceptable.
Yeah,
Okay.
fair enough. Well, yeah, I kind of think we should take a lot of what you're saying from the academic point of view, and it's always interesting to hear those different ideas, and we do have to tackle it. But what we say academically doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it as a campaign in a marketing. In the marketing world, it's the car drivers. They're everything's aimed at. They're the people that we want to do it. They're the ones that we have to implant the need on. But when we look at this with an academic hat on, we do need to understand the nature of this. So I kind of buy you in that respect. So that's why I kind of think you're both right as well. I'll move on to Ruth.
Ruth, you're muted.
I know. Thank you. I wasn't speaking. I was finding my mute button. Hi, thanks. Well, I just put in the chat about New York, the way they just cracked on with it and didn't consult on the minutiae. The problem is we consult street by street by street. So it is far too small, and local people think I can't get from one corner to the other by car. So then they object to anything bigger than that as well. I've just come back from Holland, as some of you know, and Cool Single in Rotterdam is absolutely phenomenal. And we did have someone speaking, I've forgotten his name, Leo did a talk where he said they did consult with everybody, all the businesses. The businesses said, no, we don't want it. And they kind of said, well, sorry, tough, we're doing it. And it is phenomenal. You have to look at videos of it. I think there have been some on Twitter. We spend far too much time trying to negotiate with people who, yes, I want it quiet, yes, I want it clean, but I need to get my kid to school. And sometimes we've just got to hope that councils and government override that, and Grant Shack needs to come true with his words and not just say it. Thank you.
All Right, good comment. I'll bring in Megan because I know you're a subject area specialist here. Good to see you.
What, this is like my mastermind moment, is it? God,
Sort it all out for us, Megan. We've been waiting.
So just echo some of the stuff that's already been said. I think it's especially if you were a campaigner and you're doing this alongside your day job and or 5 other committees that you've joined because you're, you've got a lot of, you've got that time and that kind of push to be civic. Don't mess around with that vocal minority. It's gonna drag you down. It's gonna be an absolute emotional toll on you. And you're not going to change their minds, so I agree with Bob when he says kind of take that step back and realize, look, those aren't the people to try to, to fix. Like Howard Cox, people naming a petrol station after him. I don't think anyone thought that was going to be the moment where he thought, you know what? I think actually like there's something in this active travel thing. So, set that to one side, and that unengaged majority that Simon was talking about, most of them are outside of London. Most of them are motorists. Most of them drive, but most of them can also see the point in seeing a lot of this change happen. So, anything you can, anytime you engage with that vocal minority, you run the risk of being called anti-motorist, at which point that lump in the middle are going to think, wait, they don't like me? Mm. That's not what you're saying at all. So I try to, again, kind of really focus on that messaging for that group who are in support, so use the bike life stats. If you've got a bike life in a city anywhere near you that shows that there's widespread public support, use some of the national stuff that came either from Bike is Best or Cycling UK or anyone else, again, to kind of make that point that most people are drivers and they want to see this change, and tell stories, find those examples. If you're going to invest that time, you'll feel better by doing it when you talk to, a family who's just got a cargo bike, or you're talking to, people who that's the way that they find it convenient to get to work, or you capture those stories of people who've actually just realized that they lived in a low traffic neighborhood and never thought of it that way. They just knew that their street was a bit quiet and there was a tree where the road probably used to go through. And if you put your limited effort into that and capturing those stories and sharing those stories, help to then inform that narrative that actually there's a heck of a lot of people out there who are driving a lot of the time and walking, or they drive some of the time and they cycle some of the time. And I think keep that message going. You'll feel better for it. And I do think it'll make more of an impact.
Oh, I told you she'd sort it out. Bob, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I did say that thing about, that when you back off and that you don't engage with someone like Howard Cox, because it's like feeding the trolls. They're not going to change their behavior, etc. The point about Howard Cox is he's the guy who, in a sense, runs the show. He managed to get the fuel tax accelerator stopped, backed up by Road Haulage Association and Freight Transport Association. And he's got an extra 110 billion quid going to motorists. So what I think, what we have to understand is that we are actually up against that kind of level of nonsense. And what I think, you're talking about, what we do for our own heads, how we focus on the positive and all these kind of things. One of the things I think is that actually a lot of cyclists need a sense of entitlement, that, we were here first, and amongst ourselves, we need to have that kind of set of ideas and understanding, and that no, we don't need to pay a road tax because one doesn't exist, and to go further into it. And I think I mean, I'm talking about that because one of the things I've been trying to get off the ground, and it's related to something that Mark Hodson talked about, is that we're trying to, guess what, train up roads and traffic police officers and get them to question their background assumptions. And as you may imagine, that's obviously something that they're being asked to do with regard to sexism and violence and everything else at the moment. Police officers are often actually quite good at having their background assumptions questioned, or at least they say they are. So it is important to kind of try and do that with various groups of people, and, you know, polite and so on, people who are supposed to be involved. Very often, people who you may be campaigning with, someone may be involved and thought, oh yes, I'd like a cycle lane down there. And then they may come up with something I found a lot from cyclists of, oh, well, you know, we have to, certain cyclists give us a bad name and we have to crack down on bad cyclists and stuff like that. And I think actually getting out of that kind of mentality that we are the problem, as it were, is something which is very important for us, for our sense of confidence, for our sense of knowing where we are and how reasonable we actually are. So yeah, you know, it's all a question of what you do in a specific situation. But I think for ourselves, we need what Brian called an academic kind of awareness and understanding.
Yeah, no, nice one. Look, I want to go back to trees, but there are lots of hands up, and I kind of, so I'm thinking if we could like just do a sentence each on this one, and we'll try and get it into the bottom. And if we can't unpack it, because I think there's an almighty can of worms here that we might have to come back to at a later date. And I want us all to think about trees by the end of the session and relax again, albeit, you know, there's quite a few problems with trees. So I'm going to run through you quickly. If there's something you absolutely have to say that Bob needs to know, say it now and try and be quick, and then we'll run over to trees. So I'm going to call them out in the order that they're in, or be it the order that people haven't spoken first. Anyway, enough of me. Adam, say anything burning.
Yeah, just a quick one. We focused a lot on the kind of logical argument for it, but we found the emotional argument to be a lot stronger now around critical mass, which is very difficult for politicians to argue against. Yeah, and they try and talk about cyclists and using pavements, and that becomes a really bad argument when it comes to children. And I think Chris Boardman, when he said in a recent article, make it about kids, make it about being able to go one extra holiday a year if you cycle rather than having a car, are the two focuses I think we seem to miss a lot, and that's really difficult to argue against.
Brilliant. Graham.
Yeah, partly was that. Most of what people have been saying is they're saying walking and cycling. I think we need to move away from exclusively walking and cycling. It's about nice places for people to live, and it's about children. These are the things, the emotive things.
Good man. Mark, it's working well, this, isn't it?
Yeah, just remember that the people, these angry people are shouting at, as somebody said in the chat, are the politicians who make the decision. We have a Stop the Gridlock group in Brighton. That's what really influenced the Labour and Tory politicians. And so actually calling them out may influence, it won't change those people, but it may change those perceptions by politicians who perceive themselves to be progressive. What Bob said reminds me of the issues with in my own case, with anti-Semitism. You've got to call out people who are aggressive and racist and horrible when they use those behaviors, and saying, oh, well, we don't want them to change their minds, doesn't work. Sorry, Simon, I disagree. I think you've got to call out people's behavior.
Well, Sandy Burnham said the same about, you know, male violence as well this week, didn't he? Just to give another example. Simon.
Yeah, I think you can call out general attitudes. You can even call out toxic individuals and isolate them away from mainstream opinions. But my point again is, Bob talked about politicians and, what if the politician believes in the freedom of the car or whatever. We're still in the game of persuading these people. Unless you want to go at them and really go at them, we're still in the game of persuading these people. So if someone's talking about freedom, the cycle, as other people have put in the chat, the bicycling is, walking is absolutely far more freeing than a car is. So you can still persuade people with a positive vision away from where they're currently at. And that's the art here. Really, the more you start saying to other people, you're wrong, what are your alternatives, you're being evil, the more you're losing the game here. Generally, the game is to persuade most politicians and people in power that your vision is a really good one.
The trees thing fascinates me. It won't be my last word. Hopefully I can say something else. But the people who drive the most in Chiswick are the ones who love the trees the most and don't want them to go, such that they've made a huge fuss about one tree, which the roots were terribly difficult for old people to walk over. We have a massive problem in this country that we don't spend enough on our taxes to maintain. So trees are not pruned enough. We have leaf fall that starts in now and goes right the way through till December, even January. And that isn't an issue for people walking and cycling, especially as cycle lanes are nearly always where the trees have dropped all their stuff. Personally, I think we need to be, somebody else put it in the chat, more pragmatic. We need to chop down some trees. We need to get rid of some verges and then put the cycle lane in to reduce the pollution, and then add more greenery and rain beds and all the rest of it. That's my feeling about that. And I've just been, as you know, some of you may have seen my film last week from Holland, where they have done exactly that. And it does seem a real problem here that we will not get rid of any greenery to create green travel for all sorts of weird reasons. But the other thing, my real last word at the moment is about connectivity again. So yesterday in the pouring rain, I cycled from Richmond to Chiswick along Kew Road, where they've put in a cycle lane. It's absolutely fantastic. Without it, I'd probably have died. Then there's Kew Bridge, which a lot of us know is a complete disaster. And then we get the wonderful C9, which is absolutely fabulous, perfect surface, perfect drop curbs and what have you. And we keep being told we mustn't complain, but I'm sorry, we have to complain, because if you've got a danger spot in the middle of two successful cycle routes, such that and only those of us who cycle already will use it, and we cannot enable other people to cycle, then it's a fail. Sorry. Thank you.